Welcome to our three-part series. There's all this research that's been happening by Mistra Urban Futures and the African Urban Research Initiative. The workshops were around the practicalities of doing co-produced work, which is about today. But I think most importantly, it's about building a cohort of emerging scholars and also building on this network and trying to connect people across the continent who are engaged in the kinds of research that we're all interested in. What we started seeing was that there was this fragmentation of knowledge, where disciplines were siloing out into their own practices and not really necessarily being able to grapple with the everyday real-world problems that you're seeing in cities. And as a result, there were a lot of experiments started emerging around using co-production and knowledge co-production in order to tackle some of these issues. And what happens when you bring different kinds of people and different kinds of knowledge into a very, very action-oriented space of research. There is a slight difference between the co-production of public goods and services, where often this is where communities and local governments co-produce very specific things like housing or infrastructure, whereas the co-production of knowledge is really about generating knowledge together. Co-production also, there are lots of different ways that co-production can be used, some for seminar series, publications, there are lots of different kinds of books that bring people together. Collaborative research projects, so the Mistra Urban Futures was based quite a lot on collaborative research projects. And then also it's not only about knowledge, scholarship and academic knowledge, it's also about the kinds of knowledge and practical knowledge we need to build policies or strategies in the cities in which we live. Sometimes co-production can be conflated with other forms of qualitative research. It's not quite the same as a focus group. Just wanted to give an overview and introduce our fantastic colleagues. So Mr. Paul Opio is he's a urban food security specialist. Gilbert Siame, also urban informality, urban knowledge co-production, climate change in cities. Dr. Gareth Haysom is going to be facilitating the second part of the session, which is much more hands-on and practical.
This afternoon. So I'll just take a few minutes to share some practical experiences from Kisumu with the Conceiving Urban Poverty project that we did in 2016 to 2018. This project was part of the work of Kisumu Local Interaction Platform that we're partnering with the African Center for Cities. And Kisumu Local Interaction Platform brings together people from the academia, from the civil society, from the city authorities, and other stakeholders in knowledge co-production and sharing. Of course, we planned to use the same process that we've been doing with all the other projects, that is to engage with people even in the early stages of the study. And in our engagements, there were questions of that were emerging even during the interview, that the traders we are talking to, the stakeholders we are talking to are asking that we have seen so many researchers come and ask us questions, but we don't get to hear about the results. So in the process, we made a commitment that after we are done with the data collection, we will analyze it and then we'll call you and present to you our findings. And you will get an opportunity to suggest what you think should be done. We ask ourselves who would benefit from this knowledge and who would be affected both either positively or negatively by any recommendations that we are going to make. So in the process of developing the policy briefs that were the outputs of this process, we had a workshop, and we were very keen even on such simple issues like the venue of the workshop. And then at the introduction stage, it was important for us to understand who is in the room and what are their interests in the issues of food security. When we started the workshops, we did the presentations of our findings, and the actual presentations were done by junior researchers. Remember that we did not want to intimidate people. We now post the questions to the audience or to the participants. Given the problems that we've identified and the challenges that we've seen, how do you think we can move forward and what do you think should be done? So we divided the participants into small groups, each including people from various backgrounds, and the participants were asked to identify the key issues that require policy action. So you need to be very tactful in moderating such these discussions so that everybody's voice can be heard. Then with that kind of information, we were able to draft the briefs, and the drafts were sent. We sent them back to the participants so that we could get their feedback. So this process ended up with the 3 policy briefs as outputs that are listed. And this was from our research. Actually, the quotation down there is taken, the study they are referring to is actually the CUP study.
I think it's really valuable to have this very practical understanding of, what happens and in the space of developing these kinds of things.
So I am going to make a presentation on particularly on how to get stakeholders into the room and how to get stakeholders working together and co-producing the knowledge. We will go straight into a short video just to refresh our mind why we are talking of co-production as a method of producing knowledge.
So, one way for a university to produce knowledge is like this. An expert finds a community, does their research, writes it up into a paper, and publishes it for everyone to see. This often gets results, but sometimes the people being researched can feel a bit left out. Either they don't ever get to see what the expert has found out, or they're left feeling the relationship was all take and no give. But there are other ways to go about it, and that's where co-production comes in. Co-production means universities and communities working together as partners to create knowledge. Both partners bring what they know and share it, and everyone learns in the process. Communities can help universities work out what research needs to be done and what questions need to be asked. And universities can help communities experiment with new experiences and skills. When we start co-producing, we don't know exactly what knowledge will emerge, but the process is open and shared amongst all the participants, and the way we work becomes part of the research. The university and the community are on the same journey. That's co-production.
Basically reminded ourselves of what co-production is, and there are certain terms that have been used in that video process. The process of getting the knowledge produced, not by universities, but by universities and communities, and not for communities, but together with communities. And the other important point is the knowledge is not generated and then shared or given to the communities. The knowledge is generated, and the community is aware of what is happening, is co-generating that knowledge, and they don't need to be given a policy brief. They need to produce a policy brief. They don't need to be given a research report. They co-own it and they co-produce it, and they have it as part of their work. No one really is the master of the co-production process. We are all masters. So in the co-production process, we studied the food distribution system in the largest market, food market in Lusaka City in Zambia. The name of the market is called Soweto. What we consider as knowledge may have multiple realities and multiple meanings. In this market, when we are trying to list the stakeholders, the number of stakeholders was going into hundreds, and each one of them have got a particular reality they deal with, and that reality is what shapes their livelihood. What we found is that both the formal and informal seem to complement one another very well. And if we're going to understand the depth and the reality, we ought to go to those depths of how the formal systems views and understand this system or this market and the food in there, and also how the informal guys also connect and understand their systems. At the core of co-production of our research in Lusaka was the issue of power and the issue of interests. Who holds what power and to what degree? And what's the interest here? We looked at categories of knowledge holders, and we looked at who would represent them, effective representation, and what would be their role and contribution. Bearing in mind the matrix of power and interest. If you can see in this picture, we engaged quite deeply with the question of power and the question of interest. He's got the power, he's got the knowledge, he's got the experiential knowledge, also has control. So we got them to the table, civil society, political actors, the list that I just outlined, to one table and say, what questions do you want us to ask? How do you want us to collect the data? And then they were very clear, we want to be part of the data collection process, want to be in the room. We developed a power interest matrix to identify who participates and who does what. They had great interest because if we disrupted their interest in the market, they would lose their livelihood. Second category in there was the party, ruling party officials, the councillor and the entire political party system that supports that person. And they needed to be very well managed because they have an office right in the market. There was another category that we needed to keep satisfied. And in this case, it was the police officer, the state police. That was a category that had low power and low interest. And in this case, it was the farmers. So we had to make an added value with them. All the four categories had a role in raising the question, in collecting the data, in analyzing the data, and in disseminating what came out of the research.
My question for both presenters, and thank you to the presenters for their presentations, is how do we sustain interest, particularly amongst the more vulnerable groups who already going into a process might feel like they have less power? And how do we sustain their interest in the project and in the process, given that also at sometimes it's not just about the co-production of knowledge, but we hope that the knowledge then informs some kind of co-production of action or implementation of a project?
Thank you. These are questions that we continue to grapple with in this methodology, and they are very, very important. How to sustain interest? One of the things that is important when doing co-production is to be upfront with the objectives of the project. The moment that is not done, then loss of interest from stakeholders is definite. Co-production has an implication on action. While talking of implementation, there is a clear articulation of the value add for all the people involved in the process. The last part on how to sustain interest, particularly how we did it in our project, is we considered co-production as an empowerment process. We had people really from the communities. That's some of the three ways that we used to sustain people's interest.
From my practical experience with the project we did is that if from the onset it is clear, the objectives of the project is clear to the stakeholders so that they know at the end of it, what is it that is going to come out of this project that will affect them directly. For example, if they know that the people they are supposed to be addressing, for example, in this case, the city authorities, the management of the markets, would be also with them in this process from the beginning to the end, then they would be keen to stay in because they know that they'll have a forum to meet with the city authorities and their concerns will be taken into account.
I just wanted to ask, I guess, about how we define communities, because I guess I understand co-production as moving away from the separation between communities and researchers or communities and whoever else is involved. But I still feel like sometimes the way co-production is spoken about still sees communities as this kind of separate thing that only exists in a certain place or time. But I also think that the boundaries between communities and the other people involved might not actually be that big, or I guess shouldn't be that big.
When we talk of communities, we are referring to the residents associations, we are referring to the community of traders in the city, the informal traders, and even the community, the business community, that is the local chamber of commerce and industry, is also a community in itself.
Late 2000, I used to use that RRA, or how do they call rapid rural appraiser. And when it comes to me, this co-production, and I realized that there is no much difference. The biggest difference that I can see is Okay, the other one was focusing on rural area. While this, for me, means that it is focusing on urban areas. So I wonder if there is really such difference. I wanted to know what kind of difference.
Really, the line is very thin, but generally RRA is about community development projects, doing a rapid appraisal for, at the end of it, the aim is to come up with some development interventions. While in co-production here, we are mostly concerned about the knowledge, though the knowledge that we get can also lead to some recommendations on some of the development issues that are affecting the communities that we are dealing with.
I think it's worth kind of trying to understand power in a little bit more detail, a little bit more depth and nuance. The kind of use of that photograph in the background was a thing that kind of woke me up to how different power might be, and how when one enters into even the market, you're met by someone who holds power, who's a gatekeeper acting as an agent who might take you to someone else. I want to try and kind of tease out power, and sometimes we see power as top down and what that might mean, but there are a variety of different forms and modes of power that play out as there are interests, and as Gilbert presented. There is this sort of structural power that comes with society. Then we've even got bureaucratic power, so just also where people have to assert favors or can assert control if they're not getting favors. There's a legal kind of power around agreements, around contracting, conditionalities. There's also the notion, old boys club or whatever it might be, these networks, and how these network power relations, allegiances, friendships, even beholdency and kind of a sense of obligation to others, all impose another layer of power. We also have ideological positions, faith, culture, social structuring, etc. Hidden power that might be around whiteness, around prejudice, around particular views of how certain people behave and act, and how that's embedded almost in their belief systems, how things like silencing might play out. And then external forces, power beyond which we have anything, of climate change, other crises, the environmental issues. So these are just some of the domains of power that I find particularly interesting, and it requires a certain reading of these dynamics during the co-production process. And just to say that these all interact with one another in really interesting and dynamic ways. This is what power might be, and what I felt, I imagine many people feel in communities when they're in a process of co-production and they don't know how to engage in that power. But it's just really to be mindful to the power and what it might be. When we lay this over one another, there is this dynamic tension that plays out across it. And for me, this means that engagement needs to be highly pragmatic. One needs to constantly sort of be iterative and respond. The need for being principled and how you maintain a particular perspective is critically important. One of the challenges with co-production, and it's not always the case, it's the story of everybody, somebody, anybody, and nobody. And I'll read this, but there is an important job to be done, and everybody was sure that somebody would do it. Anybody could have done it, but nobody did it. Somebody got angry about that because it was everybody's job. Everybody thought that anybody could do it, but nobody realized that everybody wouldn't do it. It ended up that everybody blamed somebody when nobody did what everybody could have. Whilst we're doing co-production, there still needs to be a clarity of leadership. There still needs to be a process. There still needs to define processes that hold and manage this. It's not laissez-faire necessarily. It is certainly not a process of just let's throw everyone into the room and let's see what emerges. It does need to be very carefully curated and very carefully managed through a process. And who does that and how power and that management role interface often is, for me, a critical consideration in the process of co-production. So again, knowledge co-production comes with risks and limitations. It can't do everything. Co-production allows us to do other things very differently. But they are political in nature, and these risks come with this deep political component. They're embedded in social relations, cultural assumptions, and professional incentive structures. So how these all play into the process are key. To reflect on your manifestos and the kind of intersections between power and interest in the matrix that you did earlier.
When we say co-production, and according to Gilbert's presentation, that means ownership is like everyone is part of everything. So because I'm feeling when I hear co-production, we're still talking in terms of we want to do something as a researcher and we are bringing in people like we are placing ourselves still like on a certain place where we are the ones moving the pieces around. But I'm thinking if it is co-production, again, on the other side, doesn't it mean that everyone owns everything? And in that manner, what the researcher does is their part of the co-production. Like it's no longer.
Kind of related to what Edgar was saying, there was this question around either being invited to a project or inviting people into a project, which is based on somebody driving the project in their first instance. So for me, that's a bit of a tension in terms of authorship versus co-production. And I think maybe it applies in somewhat of a similar way to knowledge and development co-production, where in each instance, either a researcher or a city department or official is kind of starting a project of sorts. And then from there, you want to get more and more into a co-production process. But in terms of the initial partners and leadership side of it, it seems like somebody who's starting the project has to take some kind of responsibility there.
We have discussions like co-production of what, right? Is it a project? Or like we were discussing, I was in the same group with Garrett, like we are actually trying to understand the process of production. So we are more observing the production that's already going. But I'm also wondering if you can have sort of like a decision, if you can take a decision as a professional, as a planner, or as a researcher of your role in this. You know, are you the expert, or are you really trying to understand what's going on and understand how you can help, you know, because then I think it takes this weight of you as somebody that holds either knowledge or resources or access to finances to say, oh, but I'm the one imposing my views.
This questioning the role of the power of the researcher coming in, and what role does one play, and how one sort of, and what else comes with that power is also critical in that process.
Also, there was something that Miriam said in our group that was really stuck with me, is this idea of co-production as an aspiration. And when you're negotiating the power dynamics and the politics of the research.
Because I think co-production ideally is about giving up power and having kind of researcher giving up the power to control the process and having like a group of different stakeholders that kind of collectively decide. So we've been involved in quite a lot of co-production processes, and often it is quite uncomfortable because you can't drive the process in some cases. Because sometimes the broader group involved in the co-production process needs to kind of collectively decide. So sometimes it does mean that no one is entirely happy with the direction things go in, but that's a good thing, because you often end up doing innovative things that you would not have done otherwise. Obviously, someone does need to start the process and organize meetings and so on, but the decisions need to be made collectively. But I did find one interesting thing that came up in our group discussion, that how the location of meetings can have a big impact on who's involved or who doesn't, and who's not involved. So some venues or locations are maybe more conducive to getting policymakers and officials. Some might be more conducive to getting like local community members.
For us, it's that venue is a key way of also to ensuring that you get the voice, etc. Anyone else? Any other comments?
Other than just the venue, it calls for a little bit of tact, managing the people, so that as a researcher, you become a facilitator, so that you let the other people's voices be heard, and then your voice should be somehow silent in some of the cases.
I've realized it's very important to be patient. Co-production is a process that can't really be rushed. So that's important. The other part is for the leader, whoever we consider as a leader, sort of exercise empathy. And so the facilitation is crucial to pay attention to the hidden power, which Gareth just mentioned.
Edgar had to step off the call because he has some other duties, but he shared something very interesting, which is that co-production doesn't make sense all the time. There's parts of projects that other forms of research make more sense. And I was wondering if anybody in the room has an experience, for example, of being asked by a funder to do co-production, but deciding that it actually didn't make sense, that another form of research made sense. And I'm asking this because the next session that we'll be going into in a week's time will be on comparative research and thinking about comparative research. And so I thought it was interesting to ask, when might it be useful to deploy co-production in these processes, and when would we not want to?
I don't have necessarily an answer on that exact situation, but I've definitely experienced where funders want co-production, but the kind of co-production that they want is very much not meaningful co-production. So it's having all the right people in the room, but really making them passive recipients of the research or whatever kind of product is in development, and no real space left for them to meaningfully be part of the production element of the process. And so a lot of that gets done and is labeled by them very happily as co-production, but we all know it to not really have achieved that goal.
In 10 minutes, just think through in the groups, go around how our thoughts on co-production have changed. Going back to the manifesto, and what would you add? What is missing from that formatted version that was sent through to you?
Is it even possible to do 100% co-production? And what we sort of agreed on was it's not possible to include everyone. And then the interesting thing was the questions you just put up about participation, right? The options that were there. Like there are so many, like if you would have put one for people to write, it would have been a different option. But it was just funny to me how even the questions that were produced are already set. Like you can never ask you can't put all the options. So some people will not find an answer, but they'll be forced to choose one of the ones that were suggested. And I think it's similar to co-production where you can't always have like all the people involved. Like somehow, somewhere just gets like, this is all we have to do, and this is all you can choose. So it was just interesting to see those questions.
The major thing that came up for me is in the area of power dynamics. For me, basically, it is that voice is given the individual who has the power required for the expected outcome of the project. For instance, if one needs pressure policy in a certain direction, then you know where the power pendulum lies, in the co-production process.
I'm curious about whether people, in some of the kind of unpacking of all of the complexities and the power dynamics, whether people feel discouraged from doing co-production.
I guess I'm equally daunted and encouraged. It's one of these things that it seems you get worried about doing it if you're not going to do it right. But also listening to everyone talk, you realize every single project is unique and there's not a single way of doing it right.
It is a sort of humility around using that word co-production, because it is becoming a sort of catch-all word for any sort of shared or collaborative research. So I am humbled by what it entails if you really want to do a co-production project or anything or participate in one. So it's given us, I've really learned a lot about some of the language and how you would approach if you were designing one from scratch. I don't know how that would look like, but it's very exciting to have these skills. But also that, don't just use this word just because it's the sort of hottest new word in the research community, because it requires some sort of work behind it.
This question of time was another component that came out in our group that I think is particularly productive in thinking through, would you, in answering Rika's question, would you go out and do it now?
We are recognizing that anybody or everybody has a say in a research that we are doing. And this is part of what that the famous word that has been used in Southern Africa, Ubuntu, which means that we are researchers because of other people.
I just wanted to really thank everybody for for joining us today, also contributing so energetically to all the discussions and the conversations. Thanks all the speakers. Thanks all everybody.